Picture yourself a mile beneath the surface, where stone walls press in from every direction. 5,000 feet down, 4 Empire State Buildings stacked end to end above your head. The air here has weight. You can feel it settle against your skin before you even take a breath. Your chest feels the pressure before your mind even registers where you are. Every breath moving through your lungs right now traveled through a 2-inch steel pipe to reach you. Nothing down here occurs naturally. Every molecule of oxygen was pumped, filtered, and pushed through miles of tunnel just to arrive. To put that depth in perspective, 5,000 feet is deeper than most submarines are rated to dive, and far beyond where sunlight has ever reached. Sound behaves differently too. A shout down here doesn't echo the way it would in an open room. It just gets absorbed into the rock and disappears. There's no wind, no birdsong, no distant traffic. Only the low mechanical hum of air being forced through steel. A sound crew stopped noticing after their first few shifts. So here's the question worth sitting with. If that pipe stopped moving air for even 10 minutes, what happens to the 300 people breathing through it? The answer isn't simple, and it isn't comforting, but you'll understand it fully before this video ends. And if you've ever worked underground yourself, some of what's coming will feel less like a revelation and more like a memory. For now, let's start with how this system works when everything is going right. A typical shift underground runs 12 hours, and it begins long before anyone reaches the rock face. Miners descend in a cage elevator that drops at roughly 600 feet per minute. Your stomach rises into your throat on the way down, the same way it does on a fast elevator, except this one doesn't stop for 8 minutes. By the time they reach the working level, the surface world is nearly a mile straight up. The mine's ventilation system is essentially a second circulatory system, built entirely out of steel and concrete. Massive fans on the surface, some over 20 feet wide, push fresh air down dedicated intake shafts. That air travels through miles of tunnel before it ever reaches a single worker. At the same time, a separate exhaust shaft pulls stale air, dust, and heat back up and out. This creates constant circulation. Air in one direction, air out the other, 24 hours a day. One shift foreman, the Vardia Ustabasha, checks these gauges by hand before every single descent, no matter what the sensors already say. If you've spent any time on a crew like this, you already know why. Instruments fail, habits don't. Without this cycle, the mine would become unbreathable within a matter of hours. Temperatures underground rise roughly 1 degree for every 100 feet of depth, so ventilation also controls heat. At 5,000 feet, natural rock temperature alone can reach over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The moving air isn't just for breathing, it's the only thing keeping the tunnel survivable at all. And that's just the baseline system. What happens when something in that chain fails is a different story entirely. Before we get there, it's worth understanding how far this technology has actually come. 100 years ago, miners judged air quality with a caged canary, watching a small bird for signs of distress long before any instrument existed. If the canary stopped singing, or worse, went still, the entire crew evacuated without waiting to ask why. It sounds primitive today, but that simple method saved more lives than most modern safety films ever mention. By the 1950s, mechanical fans replaced hand-cranked bellows. And by the 1970s, the basic shaft and fan layout still used today was already standard. If you worked a shift back then, the hum of those fans probably still lives somewhere in your memory, low and constant, like a second pulse underground. Some of this ventilation engineering hasn't fundamentally changed since that era, only the sensors got smarter. The fan housings, the shaft layouts, the basic physics of pushing air a mile underground, that part has stayed the same for 2 generations of miners. What changed is the number of eyes watching it. Where one man once listened for a canary, a control room now watches 40 sensors at once. Becoming certified to work at this depth isn't quick either. Most new miners spend 6 to 8 weeks in classroom and surface training before they're ever cleared to descend. That training covers gas identification, emergency procedure, and something less official but just as important, learning to move calmly in tight, dark spaces without your body fighting you the entire time. Physical certification tests are demanding too. Candidates have to demonstrate they can wear a self-rescuer and complete basic tasks while breathing through it, because panic during training is far safer to discover than panic underground. Not everyone passes on the first attempt, and mining companies generally see that as the system working exactly as intended, better a hard lesson on the surface than a costly one below it. Dust is the next enemy, and it's more dangerous than most people realize. Drilling and blasting release fine rock particles small enough to lodge deep in the lungs. Long-term exposure causes a disease miners call black lung, even in mines that produce no coal at all. To fight this, water sprayers run constantly at the drilling face, binding dust particles before they can spread. Ventilation engineers calculate airflow down to the cubic foot because too little movement lets dust settle in every worker's lungs. Air pressure changes with depth too, and the human body notices immediately. Miners often describe a dull ache behind the eyes during the first hour of a deep shift. A pressure that never fully goes away until they surface. Ears pop, Sinuses tighten and breathing feels heavier than it does on the surface, like inhaling through a damp cloth. Every mine at this depth also runs continuous gas monitoring, checking for methane, carbon monoxide, and dropping oxygen levels. Sensors are placed every few hundred feet, feeding data back to a control room around the clock. If oxygen falls below 19.5%, alarms sound instantly, and evacuation procedures begin without delay. Methane is treated with even more suspicion than carbon monoxide because it's invisible, odorless, and explosive at the wrong concentration. Many deep mines run a separate process called degasification, drilling small boreholes ahead of the working face to bleed methane out before crews ever get close. That gas is often captured and burned off safely on the surface, turning a hazard underground into a controlled flame nobody underground ever has to see. Filtration systems scrub the recirculated air constantly, pulling dust and fine particles down to a size smaller than a human hair before that air reaches a single lung. None of this is visible to the miners breathing it, the same way you never think about the air conditioning in a building unless it stops working. That invisibility is by design. A mine engineer once said, "The best safety system is the one nobody ever has to think about." So here's the second question. If every one of these systems is monitored this closely, what actually goes wrong when a mine loses air? That answer is coming. But first, you need to understand exactly how much air an operation like this actually consumes. In a few minutes, you're going to hear what really happens when a ventilation system fails at full depth and how a crew responds in the first 60 seconds. It's the part of this job almost nobody outside the industry ever sees. But before we get there, let's talk about the sheer scale of air this mine requires every single day. A mine supporting 300 workers at this depth can require over 1 million cubic feet of fresh air every minute. That's roughly the equivalent of ventilating a professional football stadium continuously for an entire 12-hour shift. Now here's the answer to our first question. What happens if that airflow actually stops? If a main fan fails, workers have what's called a golden window, usually less than 15 minutes before oxygen levels become dangerous. Every miner underground carries a self-rescuer, a small device that filters carbon monoxide and buys precious extra minutes. It isn't comfortable, and it isn't a long-term solution. It's built for one purpose, survival long enough to reach a refuge chamber. Refuge chambers are sealed rooms stocked with an independent air supply, water, and food, positioned every few thousand feet along the mine. A full chamber can sustain a crew of 20 for up to 36 hours, while rescue teams respond from the surface. When an alarm sounds, the shift foreman is the first person required to confirm head count before anyone is allowed to move. Every worker's location is tracked with a tag system, so command knows within seconds who is still underground and where they were last. In a few minutes, you're going to hear what happens when that 15-minute window actually runs out, and it's not what most people expect. Rescue teams on standby can be underground and moving within 8 minutes of an alarm, wearing full oxygen packs of their own. They train for this exact scenario constantly, running blind evacuation drills in total darkness. So muscle memory replaces panic. One rescue captain described it simply, "Down here, hesitation costs more than any wrong turn ever could." His hands don't shake anymore when the siren goes off, he says. They just move. Air loss isn't the only emergency this system is built for. Fire underground presents an entirely different kind of danger. Smoke behaves strangely in a confined tunnel, rising, spreading, and following the exact same airflow paths that normally keep everyone breathing. If a fire breaks out, the ventilation system has to do the opposite of its normal job, reversing airflow to push smoke away from escape routes instead of through them.